Hello everyone, I'm Terry Duke and welcome to my channel. About 5 months ago, I started a weekly stream in which I would play my favorite mod from WARBAND, Perisno, with the goal of conquering the entire world without ever using any cheats. And so today, I just want to share with you how that went, from summing up my entire campaign, to what ruling over all of Perisno looks like now. So let's get to it. As you see, the entire world map is united under one banner, that of the Perisnoan Empire, ruled by Empress Gaia, a female giant that I created with chat last year. But how did we get all the way here? Well, it started the same way every new campaign does, with virtually nothing. The first session was rough, as I tried going from town to town to make money from tournaments, level up, grab some gear, but I often landed on larger groups of overpowered bandits and got captured multiple times. The second session got a lot better though, as I managed to build a warband and get better gear. With my renown rising, I was immediately able to become a vassal in the Rakdos Dragon, and I started doing unique quests, like the one for the Red Immortal Shield and the Kingslayer Sword, while also going to war with the Kingdom of Tolrania. By the fourth session, I had more money, unique items, and a strong elite warband, but that was also the first and pretty much only complete crushing defeat I suffered when I walked straight into the Tolranian army. By the sixth session though, I had not only completely recovered, but I decided that I had enough soldiers, skills, and money to leave the Reich and start my own kingdom, which I did by attacking the Sut Giants, a small, rather isolated faction just west of the Reich. The siege of Sut was actually the most difficult of my entire campaign, since I barely had 130 men, and the garrison had over 800. This meant I spent 4 hours doing small assaults with my archers to wear down the defenders before traveling everywhere to get mercenaries to replenish my army, and so on. It took 8 assaults in total, but I succeeded in creating my own faction, which I named the Perisnoan Empire. This was also around the time that the Zan dynasty invaded Perisno, and by the first week they had nearly wiped out most factions of the coast. So while I had my own kingdom, I wasn't under any serious risk of attack, as most factions were busy fighting off the Zan. From the 7th to 11th session, it was a slow expansion of the empire, which I pretty much did solo. As soon as I finished off the Sut Giants, I went to war with the Kulan Horde and the Bakal Giants. Those were also small, isolated factions, and by then, because I had my own kingdom, my party size increased substantially, so attacking their towns and castles was much easier. And because they are so remote from the rest of Perisno, I never had to worry about those lands getting invaded by anybody. Where it got more difficult though was my war with the Reich. I tried to start the Elikofalki quest line, which has you attack Reich caravans, so I ended up at war with the Reich, but because I still didn't have much right to rule and was pretty much the only lord of my faction, they would always refuse to make peace. So I gradually had to conquer all of them until they could no longer fight me, and that took way too long. However, by the time I had destroyed the Reich, I had a few lords join my kingdom, and I was able to give them lands to raise more troops, and with a full army on my side, we had a brief war with Drahara, capturing 2 castles, before I ultimately decided to declare war on the Zan on the 12th session. My plan for the first war was to take Galway, the former Tolranian capital, which also stands at the very center of the world map, before moving on to capture all of their lands in the Reich. And it initially went well. We captured Galway and moved on to their castles before they even had time to react. However, my army would be worn down by multiple sieges, and my lord stopped following me around to go get more troops. And it was at this point that the Zan attacked me by attacking my new capital, Galway, with well over 2,000 men. I got into the city just in time for a night siege, and we only narrowly defeated them. I had like 20 men left. After that, I was able to recover and capture the remaining towns in the Reich before the Zan finally sued for peace. So by the 13th session, we controlled all of the Reich, plus all of the small factions to the west end of the map. So in this situation, the Perisnoan Empire basically became the second most powerful faction, second only to the Zan. And I'll also say in hindsight that it was at this point that I had beaten the mod and became virtually unstoppable. I was making so much money from all of my lands that I could always field the most elite army possible, and I had numerous lords by then as well, so when going on campaign, I could easily lead around 3,000 men. And so, we went at war with Drahara for the second time, and it was the first of many slaughters to come. We took every castle and town by storm, and Drahara was completely powerless to stop us. By the end of the 14th session, we had taken most of the Drahara lands. And with more lords joining the empire and more lands to distribute, we were stronger than ever. Which is when we got into the toughest war of my campaign, the war with the Valahir clans. In all my playthroughs, I never even considered attacking the Valahir island, because they have all these massive groups called People of Valahir, often numbering over 1,000 men of elite tier. It took 3 sessions and 3 full invasions to conquer the island. What would happen is, we would get into battle with one of those massive groups and win, but then another one would show up. and another. And after a while, my army, as massive as it was, would inevitably get worn down, separated, and eventually destroyed. So yeah, that was the toughest war, and I'd say casualties were at least 10,000 for the Valahir and around 5,000 for my empire. However, by that point in the campaign, with nearly half the map under my control and a virtually unstoppable army, I decided to progress the campaign outside of the weekly live streams because we were getting into a serious grind of just attacking towns and castles. And so from the 17th to the 21st sessions, both live and in my own time, I went about taking the rest of the world. First I attacked the Elentor, but they had a defensive pact with the Akan Empire and Geldar. None of them were strong enough though, so I just rolled over all of them. Then I declared war on the Dwarves, but they only had one town left. It was one grindy siege that took most of one session, but eventually we won. Offline, I declared war on the realm of the Falcon and took most of their towns and castles with ease, except for Fountain Hall, which was, without a doubt, the most annoying siege I ever had. We also had a quick war with the Arulo afterwards, but they were always just a small faction, so with the full army, we rolled over them like it was nothing. And that left us with Dazan, which by then only occupied portions of Macavia and Tolrania. The final war was pretty easy, with the main exception that they were able to amass several armies over the course of the conquest, so we had a few battles, but as usual, they couldn't stop us. I purposefully kept Dazan fort for last as a way of pushing the invaders out of Calradia once and for all. And so, that's how I conquered all of Perisno, without any cheats. In total, it took about 24 sessions for a total of around 60 hours. And now, here's a look at my character, my inventory, and my empire. So as for my character, so this is Empress Gaia, and by the time I finished the campaign, I reached level 37. Ultimately, I really made it in a way that even without companions, I could still do most things on my own, which is why Engineer and First Aid and Surgery are fairly high. Trainer is also very high because I'm trying to get my troops up and going really quickly. But yeah, that's about it. So it's my character, and now it takes so much XP to level up that I can't even remember the last time I reached level 37. As for my inventory, I mean, we're doing pretty good. So right off the bat, this is the Dreaded Sword, which I'll show in a moment. This is the sword that you get from defeating the Dreaded Nightmare, which is one of the toughest NPCs in the entire mod. But this sword is really overpowered because what it does is, every time you hit enemies, you regain some health. So as long as you don't get completely overwhelmed, you could stay in the fight for a ridiculously long period of time. In fact, most of the kills, as we'll later see in the reports, are probably after I got the sword, because before getting the sword, I would frequently die. Then we have Duskfall, which is one of the most powerful bows in the game, and this one you get from conquering Elentor, so I actually received it much later in the campaign, but that was the first time I actively started using a bow, because before that, I would only use hand-to-hand weapons. As for the armor, I mean, I'm trying to stay in the thematic of like being the Perisno and Empress, so all my gear is meant to reflect that, but it's all fairly overpowered, not the best armor in the game, but the whole outfit looks pretty cool in my opinion. We also have the Drake, of course, which you get from completing the Dragon Priest quest in the Reich, and currently that's my main loadout. But of course, that's not the only items I had. Like, I was talking about like the Dreaded Nightmare. I have the full gear right here. I just think it looks so ridiculous altogether. I mean, it does look badass, don't get me wrong, but like, holy hell. This is insane. I have plenty of other unique items which I just keep in storage, so for that I just need to access my storage. So for example, I have the Red Imperial armor, which is the armor you would get from the Red Immortals. I have the Kingslayer sword, which is one of the main swords you can get in the game. It's like an overpowered bastard sword, it's really good. You have Nisanian's Legacy, which is basically the same as the Dreaded Nightmare, except for the healing capacity. But this is a sword that you get from defeating the Foreign King, which I've done at a previous point in my campaign. Here I have Skyfall, which is another overpowered, actually slightly better than the Kingslayer, and this one you get from defeating the leader of the Lycofelki faction. And also from the Red Immortals I have the Aegis Shield, which is the most powerful shield in the entire game. I switch it around occasionally, but for the most part I just stick to what I have. Oh my god. And I decided to look for the first time after completing the campaign. Turns out I killed 4,241 soldiers and I wounded 195. So you can guess which type of weapon I tend to use. But yeah, after having finished the campaign, this is the total number of people I've killed. In terms of how many lands I actually own, well, currently I don't actually give myself a lot because I tend to just distribute it to the lords, but I have in total 5 towns: Forneron, Voldeberg, Kulvara, Galway, and Grund. Also, one of my main goals was to get married to Princess Birgit, because I decided I had a crush on her early on. And eventually, once she joined my faction and I gave her a town, our relation raised so highly that I was able to marry her almost immediately, and so this is my wife. And she's completely devoted to me. In terms of renown, this is also the most I've ever had. I'm close to 10,000 in renown right now, and I mean, I don't know what to say, like, this is the most I've ever had. Because I have such a large amount of renown, my party limit is also really big, and I've had a really hard time recently just keeping it at the max capacity, but currently I can field an army of 434 men, which currently I'm only at 384, and as you can see, it costs me 41,000 per week for this entire army, because a lot of them are just so ridiculously elite. And so yeah, as you can see, this is my army. All my companions are like right in the front. They are insanely powerful. I also, of course, have a whole lot of companions, and at this point the companions, like, they don't all give me like super niche party skills, because a lot of them I hold pretty highly on my own, but they are all ridiculously overpowered. Notably, there's the High Dragon Priestess Kivachis, which is how I think you say it. This companion you get from completing the Dragon Priest quest, and she is insanely powerful. One of my most devastating infantry units, which I've just given a horse recently, is Track, and he's my giant bodyguard, so to speak, and he's also extremely powerful, especially when it comes to melee, so that's why, like, he's always in the thick of the fighting, no matter where I send him. And then there's Aracanis, which is probably the most expensive companion you can get. He comes with the Flamebringer sword, which is the sword in the game that has fire around it. I don't typically like using it because it's very distracting visually, so I let him keep it, but he costs 100,000 to hire, and that's the main reason. It's so you can get that sword, and he's also got a lot of really good skills, so if you were to make him a lord, for example, he would be a highly effective one. As for how much money I have, well, in my inventory right now I have 356,000. In the treasury we currently have 2.7 million. So yeah, this is what I mean when I said I'm basically unstoppable, because I have so much money that, like, even if by the very end the Zan somehow managed to completely annihilate me, I could rebuild the same army 100 times over and just try again. And if you want to look at this like week by week, like we absolutely can, like the budget is getting really complex now, but you can also see it very plainly. So mostly I'm just getting the rents and revenues from everywhere. I have a few businesses in some towns, like a wool weavery, a wine press, dye works, and other things like that. I'm losing almost 15,000 purely from transfer inefficiency, but in total, I'm currently making around 175,000 per week, which is why the money keeps going so high and I can't seem to stop it. As for the Empire itself, we definitely have more lands than we have lords, but that's also because when it comes to the lords themselves, I always pick them based on two specific personality types, which is either good nature or upstanding. So these are lords who typically care about justice, who care about doing things the right way, and because of that, they're not selfish at all. So if there's a lord that doesn't have any lands, all of them are going to support that one lord getting some lands. And because they all view things the same way, there's never been any drama, because every time I ask if there's any ways of strengthening our kingdom's unity, I always get the answer that there's nothing to do, because everyone gets along with each other so much. In fact, as you can look yourself, like devoted is the highest relationship value you can get with every lord, and as you see, almost all of them are devoted, loyal, fond. In fact, currently, if I look at the reports based on like the lords known by relations, the lord that likes me the least in my kingdom is Duke Yuan, which just joined me, and my relation with him is 56. Actually, it's not true. There's Diandarian, and his relation with me is 46. And finally, looking at the empire's size, we can look at the constable for the army. We currently have 1,475 soldiers garrisoned in 5 towns and 1 castles. So that's just my army. In addition, you have 388 soldiers in your convoy and 16 soldiers in patrol. But if we look at the army for the kingdom, our kingdom currently has 47,000 soldiers garrisoned in 29 towns and 65 castles. In addition, we have 6,900 soldiers in the field. So again, this is what I meant when I say I'm unstoppable, because most of that army will join me on a campaign, and that means I can take any castle with ease. So there you go. That was my campaign to conquer all of Perisno. and honestly, it went surprisingly better than I thought it would. In terms of the toughest challenges I've had, I would say the toughest faction to beat was the Valahir clan, without a doubt. Toughest enemy army though was the dreaded Nightmare, as he spawned with a warband of 1,000, mostly made up of elite troops, and he actually defeated me multiple times as I was wearing him down. The toughest sieges were Sut, Fountain Hall, and Azure Keep. Sut, as I mentioned earlier, was mostly difficult because of my limited amount of troops, but in the case of the latter two, I had my full army in both, and it was still an absolute slaughter. In Fountain Hall, you basically have to roll up a siege tower across a ridiculously long bridge, while elite Falconian archers shoot from all sides. And because we were on a narrow bridge, I couldn't deploy my archers properly, so I'd lose hundreds of men before ever reaching the walls. With Azure Keep, this castle is absolutely massive, but easy to push through until you reach the main keep, where archers spawn and rain arrows down on everyone going through the only path available. And because the castle is so huge, they could destroy an entire wave minutes before the next one would arrive. I ended up losing 1,500 men in my first assault, and the second one didn't go much better. And the toughest unique quest, surprisingly, was the Red Immortal quest. It likely has to do with me starting it too early, but part of the quest is attacking a bandit lair, and the latest update for the mod filled the bandit lair with elite tier troops, so I lost several times, which was frustrating. And with that, thanks for watching everyone. That was my main Perisno campaign without cheats, but I'm not done live streaming, so the next question is, which mod should I pick for my next campaign? Let me know in the comments which one you'd like to see me try, and I'll see you next time.